During the previous part of this tutorial, I demonstrated how you can fit a simple linear trend line to a data series. I also demonstrated how you can format that trend line and also how you can remove anomalous data from your data series in order to gain a better fit. One of the other things that I demonstrated was how to display an equation for your line of best fit, which in this case is displayed at the top of the graph in red writing. Several qualifications require you to be able to calculate the gradient of any best fit line, and the gradient, of course, in this case is just the term that precedes the x, which is 0.0127. The International Baccalaureate qualification requires that you go one step further than this by calculating the uncertainty in that gradient, and the way this can be done is by plotting trend lines of maximum and minimum gradient. The purpose of this tutorial is to show you how to do that. First of all, in order to display our maximum and minimum gradient lines, we need to add error bars to our data. The way I'm going to do this is by right-clicking on one of the data points in my main series. A tiny context-based menu comes up and I want to select the first item in that menu, which is Format Data Series. When I click on that, a dialog box opens and I now want to select the option for Y error bars. Now, I've already discussed in a previous tutorial how to add error bars to data, so I'm not going to go over that in much detail, but in this particular case I'm going to select both types of error bars and I'm going to add custom error bars. The custom error bars are going to come from my data which is on the sheet, and you'll notice that I've got a little column here which is called uncertainty. Now, the data series that I've selected consists of just the data that is written in black, and so for that reason I've got to be careful when selecting my custom series that I only include those items of data. So what I'm going to do is hold the Control key and then I'm going to highlight the first two options in my uncertainty column. Then I'm going to miss out the data associated with my first anomaly. I'll select the next three, keeping the Control button held, and then the final piece of data. If I click the button on the right hand side of the Format Data Series box, it enters that into the plus custom column, and then basically what I need to do is the same thing again for minus. So once again I'll select the first two items of data, miss out the first anomaly, miss out the second anomaly, and enter that. And when I click OK, my customized error bars will be fitted to each item of data. I now need to do the same thing for my anomalies to display the error bars associated with them. Once again I'm going to select both. I'm going to select custom, click on the first box, go to my sheet, and this time I'm going to select the two red pieces of data associated with the anomalies. I'm going to do that again for the minus. So once again select exactly the two bits of data, holding the Control key pressed, and now I have, in addition to the error bars attached to my standard data series, I've got them attached to the anomalies as well. Now, the aim of adding maximum minimum best fit lines is to try and come up with a line that passes through the error bars that has as high a gradient as possible and one that has as low a possible gradient as possible. Now, a simple but acceptable way of doing this is essentially to draw a line going from the top of the first error bar to the bottom of the final error bar in order to get your minimum gradient, and then one going from the bottom of the first error bar to the top of the second error bar, and use that for your maximum gradient. Now, the way we're going to do this is we're going to return to the sheet, and what I'm going to do is create two more columns, one of which I'm going to call min and one of which I'm going to call max. Now, I only need two pieces of data in each of these columns. For the minimum column, in my first row I'm going to let this be equal to my average value, the y value for that piece of data, and then, because I want it to be a minimum gradient, I'm going to add to that the uncertainty. I'm then going to do the same thing for the bottom row. This time I'm going to let that be equal to my average piece of data for that row, but this time I'm going to subtract the uncertainty from that. Now, if I go back to my chart and now right-click on one of the points, I can go to source data again. Now, if I go to series, using the tab at the top, I can then add a new series which is going to represent the minimum gradient line. So for this new series, I'm going to give it the name min, and then for my x values, I simply need to go to the sheet and I select the two x values associated with the first row and the second row. So select the first row, then hold Control and select the second row. And then for the y values, I'm going to select the two data values that I've just calculated. The data value in the first row, the data value in the second row, holding Control once again once you select those two, and then press Enter. And if I now click OK, you should notice that if you look at the first error bar, there is now a point that has appeared at the top of that error bar and a point that has appeared at the bottom of the final error bar. If I right click on one of those points, I can now add a trend line, a linear trend line in this case, and if I click OK, you'll see that I've got a trend line linking those 2 points together. The final thing I'm going to do to tidy up the graph a little bit is I'm going to format the trend line. I'm going to alter the colour of it by making it, in this case I think I'll go for a light grey to distinguish it from the main trend line. I'm also going to alter the options. I want to display the equation on chart, and I'm going to forecast 100 units backwards, and once I've done that, that is the line that I end up with, and the equation I will just drag it to the top for the moment. Having done that, I'm going to do exactly the same thing now to get a maximum line. In my maximum column, I'm now going to calculate that the top row is just equal to my average once again, but this time I'm going to subtract the uncertainty, and for the bottom row I'm going to let that be equal to the average, and this time I will add the uncertainty. So that gives me my two new values, and once again, by right clicking on any point, I'm going to select source data and add a new series. This time I'm going to call it max. My y values once again are going to be from the first column and the second column like so, and then for my y values I will select the two values that I have just calculated, and when I do that and select OK, you should notice two new points, this time at the bottom and top of the trend lines of the error bars appropriately. If I add my trend line linear, I'm going to display my equation on the chart, forecast backwards 100 units, OK, and then once again I will just alter the colour of it to a light grey. There we have our maximum and minimum gradients, like so. Finally, the last thing I'm going to do is calculate the uncertainty from those gradients in my trend line. Now I'm going to go back to the sheet to do that and just take a note of the three gradients that I've calculated for the lines: 0.0141, 0.0127 and 0.0112. Now the middle of those readings is what I'm going to take as my average gradient, 0.0127. My other two readings, which I'll just record over here for the time being, were 0.0141 and 0.0112. I'm just going to enter those into the two boxes. In order to calculate them as an uncertainty, I'm going to write down here, first of all, just plus or minus, because basically my gradient is going to be equal to the value that I've written in the cell there, plus or minus my uncertainty, which I'll put in the next cell. You'll notice I put a little inverted comma before the plus or minus. That's so that Excel does not confuse it with an equation. And then in this row, where I'm going to write my uncertainty, I'm simply going to tell this to be equal to, open brackets, the first value minus the second value divided by 2. And that gives me the uncertainty. There is one final thing that I need to do, and that is just display both of these points to a suitable number of significant figures. The uncertainty really should only be displayed to one significant figure, so I should display that as 0.001, and I need to make sure that my gradient is also displayed to the same number of significant figures. So if I select both of those, format data series, I can now display them as a number, and in this particular case I want to display them to 3 decimal places because my 1 is the 3rd decimal place, and if I do so, you'll notice that I have got an appropriate display of the gradient.